Imagine having a virus, right, actively replicating inside your body, just quietly destroying your immune system for like a full decade,
Mm.
and you feel absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
Yeah, I mean, no fever, no cough, just silence. You go to work, you hit the gym, you live your normal life, and you're completely unaware that there's this biological countdown clock ticking away inside you. So today we are doing a deep dive into the CDC's comprehensive data on HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus. And our mission for you, the listener, is to really understand why the greatest danger this virus possesses isn't some loud, obvious attack, but its total, terrifying invisibility.
Yeah, the clinical reality of HIV today is entirely defined by that invisibility. I mean, we are looking at a pathogen that operates fundamentally differently than the bugs most of us are used to dealing with. So we really need to establish a very clear baseline drawn directly from this CDC briefing, which is that HIV specifically targets and attacks the body's own immune system.
Right. It goes after the defense system itself.
Exactly. And, there is currently no effective cure, meaning it is a lifelong infection. But the secondary, and I'd argue the more important baseline here, is that modern medical care can completely control it.
But controlling it requires understanding how it hides in plain sight to begin with.
Mm.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the initial entry of HIV into the body is just notoriously deceptive. It operates kind of like a highly sophisticated computer hacker bypassing a firewall. According to the data, within, I think it's 2 to 4 weeks of the initial infection, a person might experience flu-like symptoms. We are talking about a mild fever, fatigue, maybe some body aches.
Right, and those symptoms stick around for a few days or weeks, and then they just vanish.
They're gone.
What's fascinating here is how the body's natural alarm system actually masks the specific threat. I mean, think about it. A fever and fatigue are the most generic alarms the human body has. Having those symptoms doesn't point to HIV. They point to literally hundreds of temporary everyday illnesses.
Right, so you just think, oh, I got a bug.
Exactly. The body is sounding the alarm, sure, but the tone is indistinguishable from a common cold.
And the briefing notes that some people don't even get that generic alarm. Like some people experience absolutely zero symptoms during this initial phase. The hacker slips through the firewall without a single alert popping up on the monitor.
And because of that, the CDC is incredibly strict on this point. You cannot rely on how you feel to determine your status. Your body will not reliably tell you that HIV has entered the system. The only definitive way to know is through a specialized diagnostic test.
So if the virus relies entirely on this silent, stealthy entry, then our first line of defense has to be understanding exactly how it moves from one person to another. We have to map out the physical pathways because HIV doesn't just float through the air like COVID-19 or the flu. The biological requirements for transmission are highly restricted.
Very restricted. The virus can only survive and transmit within highly specific bodily fluids. The CDC list is absolute here. We are looking at blood, semen or compreseminal fluid, rectal fluids, and vaginal fluids.
So no saliva.
Right. Saliva, sweat, and tears are not on that list. You cannot get it from those.
Let's look at the mechanical process here, because I think this is where people get confused. Just having those specific fluids present in a room or, I don't know, on a surface isn't enough. There's a secondary biological requirement.
Yeah.
The CDC states those fluids must come into direct contact with a mucous membrane, damaged tissue, or be directly injected into the bloodstream, like through sharing needles.
The mechanics are very rigid. Most people contract the virus through anal or vaginal sex or by sharing drug injection equipment. Those specific actions provide the exact, direct pathway the virus needs to cross from one human body to another.
Yeah, and I want to push back on the casual language we often hear around this because I think it creates a lot of unnecessary fear. People constantly use the word catch. They worry about catching HIV on a crowded bus or from a toilet seat or from sharing a drink with a friend. But based on the biological mechanics we're outlining from this briefing, catching is a completely inaccurate verb.
Oh, absolutely.
It implies something passive, like you just walk through a cloud of it.
It is entirely inaccurate. Transmission requires a precise mechanical lock and key. The specific fluids, the blood, semen, vaginal fluids, those are the keys. And the mucous membranes, or the direct pathways into the bloodstream, those are the locks. If the key is never inserted into the lock, the virus physically cannot transmit.
It's biologically impossible.
Right.
So if the lock and key mechanism is that rigid, how do other factors play into this? Because the CDC notes that having another sexually transmitted infection, like an STI, makes it much easier to contract HIV.
Yeah.
Why would a completely different infection change the mechanics of an HIV exposure?
Well, it acts kind of like WD-40 for that lock, making transmission way easier. It comes down to what happens at a microscopic level when you have an STI, like, say, syphilis or gonorrhea.
Hmm.
First, an STI often causes physical inflammation or microscopic ulcers.
Which creates a physical opening.
Exactly. It literally creates new, highly vulnerable locks, like tiny breaks in the tissue for the HIV virus to enter. But biologically, it is even more insidious than that.
Insidious how? What is actually happening on a cellular level?
So, when you have an infection, your immune system naturally sends its first responders, the white blood cells. It sends them to the site of the infection to fight it off. But HIV specifically targets and infects white blood cells.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so by having an STI, your body is unknowingly sending the exact cells that HIV wants to infect directly to the entry point. You are essentially delivering the virus's favorite food right to the front door.
That is a brutal biological irony. Your body is trying to protect you, and it just rolls out the red carpet.
It really is.
And the briefing also heavily emphasizes that drug and alcohol use are major risk factors. But, I mean, obviously alcohol doesn't contain HIV.
No, but alcohol and drugs profoundly alter the behavioral landscape, which indirectly alters the biological risk. I mean, when inhibitions are lowered, a person is statistically much less likely to use a condom correctly, or they might be more likely to share injection equipment.
So they are inadvertently exposing those biological locks to potential keys.
Exactly. They're dropping their physical barriers.
Well, if the transmission requires such a specific mechanical pathway, it makes sense that medical science would look at this and realize, hey, we can build tools to intercept it. If we know exactly how the key fits into the lock, we can build something to block the keyhole. Which brings us to the modern pharmaceutical tools for prevention, PrEP and PEP.
Yeah, these medications represent a total paradigm shift in how we handle this. We are no longer relying solely on physical barriers like condoms. PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis, and PP stands for post-exposure prophylaxis.
Okay, I need to understand the how here. I understand how a condom physically blocks a fluid from touching a mucous membrane. That's easy. But how does swallowing a pill every day, like in the case of PrEP, physically stop a virus from taking hold in the body if an exposure happens?
To understand PrEP, you have to understand how HIV multiplies. When HIV enters a white blood cell, it uses a specific enzyme inside the cell to copy itself. It essentially hijacks the cell's photocopier to make millions of copies of the virus.
Okay, I'm following.
PEP is a medication that floods those cells and physically blocks that specific enzyme.
So it jams the photocopier.
Precisely. The virus gets inside the body, it finds a cell, but when it tries to replicate, the mechanism is jammed. Because it cannot replicate, it just dies out before it can establish a permanent infection.
That's incredible.
It really is. And PEP is taken proactively before a potential exposure, so the drug is already built up in the body's tissues, waiting. PEP, on the other hand, is an emergency intervention. If you have a potential exposure, you can take PEP within 72 hours to try and jam that photocopier before the virus finishes its initial replication phase.
It's like the plan B for HIV.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? We have these highly effective tools, but they only work if you know you need them. And that leads to the CDC's universal testing guidelines, which honestly cast an incredibly wide net. The recommendation is that everyone, literally everyone between the ages of 13 and 64, should get tested for HIV at least once, with more frequent testing for those with specific risk factors.
Yeah, casting a net from age 13 to 64 covers virtually the entire sexually active lifespan of a human being. The CDC is intentionally moving away from targeted testing and moving toward universal screening.
It feels like an attempt to completely rebrand what an HIV test is. Because, historically, an HIV test was a panic button. You only got one if you thought you had made a mistake or you were terrified of an exposure. By saying everyone from a high school freshman to someone nearing retirement needs this test, they are trying to make it a routine, normalized health check for you, the listener. It should be as boring and standard as getting your cholesterol checked.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, testing is the definitive pivot point for the entire epidemic. Everything in modern HIV science hinges on a person knowing their status. Because if you take one of these quick accessible tests and the result is negative, you can immediately leverage that knowledge. You can talk to a doctor about going on PrEP to ensure you stay negative.
Right, but what if the test is positive? That is the moment that forces a massive divergence in the timeline of a person's life. There is the timeline where the virus is left untreated, and the timeline where modern medicine steps in.
Let's trace the untreated timeline first, because this goes back to our opening scenario of the 10-year silent countdown. The CDC breaks the untreated progression into 3 distinct stages.
Right, so stage 1 is the acute HIV infection phase. This occurs right after transmission. The virus is multiplying rapidly, meaning the person has a massive viral load, which simply refers to the amount of the virus present in their blood.
And because the viral load is so high, they are incredibly contagious.
Very much so.
Yeah.
This is that 2 to 4 week window where those deceptive flu-like symptoms might appear.
Okay, so after that acute phase, the virus settles into stage 2, which is called chronic HIV infection or clinical latency. Here's where it gets really interesting. This is the stage where the person feels totally fine.
Completely normal. They can feel fine for a decade or more. Wait, I need to stop you there. How is it physically possible for a highly destructive virus to be ravaging your immune system for 10 years, but not trigger a single fever, cough, or physical symptom? How does the body just ignore it?
It's counterintuitive, right? But it's because the virus isn't attacking the organs that make you feel overtly sick in a traditional way. It isn't attacking your lungs like pneumonia or your stomach like food poisoning. It is executing this slow, microscopic war of attrition against your CD4 cells.
CD4 cells, let's define those clearly for the listener. What are they?
CD4 cells are a specific type of white blood cell. Think of them as the generals of your immune system. When a random bacteria or a common virus enters your body, the CD4 cells are the ones that spot the threat and signal the rest of the immune system to attack. HIV specifically infects, uses, and destroys these generals.
So during this 10-year silent phase, the virus is just quietly assassinating the general, one by one.
Exactly, but the overall your immune system is massive. So losing a few generals a day doesn't collapse the system immediately. You still feel fine. Your body can still fight off a common cold.
But over the course of a decade.
Over a decade, the virus is slowly, silently eroding the fundamental command structure of your immunity. The viral load is lower than in stage 1, but the virus is still active, still replicating, and still highly transmittable.
Until the command structure finally collapses, which pushes the timeline into stage 3.
Yes. Stage 3 is AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And we need to be clear here. This is not a different virus. It is the final, most severe stage of an untreated HIV infection. The clinical definition for an AIDS diagnosis is when that slow war of attrition finally drops a person's CD4 cell count below 200 cells per milliliter of blood.
Okay, for context, what is a normal, healthy CD4 count?
A healthy adult typically has anywhere from 500 to 1,500 CD4 cells per milliliter. So dropping below 200 means the immune system is fundamentally shattered, the generals are gone.
And without the generals to call in the troops, the body just becomes a playground for opportunistic infections.
Yes, that's exactly what happens. Illnesses that a normal, healthy immune system would swat away effortlessly. Certain types of pneumonia, rare cancers, fungal infections, they suddenly see an opportunity to take root and spread rapidly. And at this point, the viral load of HIV shoots back up to dangerous levels, making the person highly contagious again.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And the CDC data is grim on this point. Without treatment, people who progress to AIDS typically survive about 3 years.
That is the biological reality of the untreated timeline. It is a slow, silent erosion that ends in structural collapse. But we are not living in the 1980s anymore. Let's rewind the clock back to that pivot point. A person gets a positive test result, and instead of ignoring it, they enter the medical timeline. They start ART.
Right, ART. That stands for antiretroviral therapy.
Let's break down that term, because I think it explains what the virus actually is. Why is it called antiretroviral? What makes HIV a retrovirus rather than just a standard virus like the flu?
It comes down to how the virus stores its genetic blueprint. A standard virus enters a cell, uses the cell's machinery to make copies of itself, and then bursts out. A retrovirus does something much more permanent.
What does it do?
It actually carries an enzyme that allows it to convert its own RNA into DNA. And then it literally splices its own genetic code directly into the DNA of your human cells. It permanently alters the host cell's genetic blueprint.
Wait, really? It rewrites the code of the cell to turn it into an HIV factory?
Precisely. It becomes part of you. That is why there is no cure yet. The virus integrates itself into your very DNA. So antiretroviral therapy is a highly specialized regimen of medications designed to disrupt this specific complex replication process at multiple stages.
And the CDC guidance states that a person should start RT as soon as possible after a diagnosis. What happens when you drop this medication into a body that is currently in stage 2? that silent war of attrition.
It halts the attrition completely. RT stops the virus from multiplying. Because the virus can no longer replicate and destroy the CD4 cells, the immune system actually has time to recover and rebuild its defenses. People who take ART exactly as prescribed will likely never move into stage 3. They will never develop AIDS. Their immune system remains intact.
And this mechanism leads to a medical reality that is completely reshaping how society views HIV. Because when a person stays on ART, the medication can suppress the virus so heavily that the viral load, the number of copies of the virus per milliliter of blood, it drops so low that standard diagnostic tests cannot even detect it anymore.
Yeah, this is known as achieving an undetectable viral load. The virus is still in the body, hiding in reservoirs, but it is completely suppressed.
And the CDC stance on what happens when a person reaches an undetectable viral load is pretty definitive, isn't it?
The scientific consensus is absolute. If you have an undetectable viral load, you will not transmit HIV to your sexual partners.
Let's make sure that lands for the listener, because it is the most critical biological fact we've discussed today. You have a virus that requires specific bodily fluids to transmit. The medication suppresses the virus so deeply within those fluids that transmission during sex becomes biologically impossible.
It really is a modern miracle. The medical community shorthand for this is U equals U. Undetectable equals untransmittable. It is a profound demonstration of targeting the mechanics of a virus. Furthermore, maintaining an undetectable viral load significantly reduces the risk of transmission if a person shares injection equipment, and it drastically reduces the risk of passing the virus to a child during pregnancy, labor, and delivery.
The CDC summarizes it by stating that getting and keeping an undetectable viral load is the single best thing a person with HIV can do to stay healthy and protect others. They can live a normal lifespan, entirely free from the fear of passing the virus to the people they love.
We have mapped the entire life cycle here. We see a virus that relies on a stealthy 10-year silent phase. We see a highly rigid lock-and-key mechanism for transmission. And we see an array of pharmaceutical tools that can jam the keyhole proactively with PrEP or suppress the virus to the point of untransmittability with RT.
So for you listening right now, the mission of this deep dive translates into very clear actions. First, understand the exact biological pathways of transmission, so your decisions are based on science, not outdated myths or fear. Second, know that the tools for prevention are pharmaceutical and highly effective. And third, understand that universal testing is the engine that drives this entire system. Testing is the only way to confirm you are negative and utilize PrP, or confirm you are positive and utilize RT to stop the virus and become undetectable.
This raises an important question, though. Looking at the sheer capability of the modern medical tools the CDC has outlined, we have the pharmaceuticals to prevent the virus from taking hold, and we have the treatments to render it untransmittable in those who have it. The science has essentially solved the biological mechanics of stopping this virus. So is the final barrier to ending this epidemic no longer a scientific puzzle? Is it now entirely a human challenge? A challenge of overcoming social stigma, of actually implementing universal testing for everyone aged 13 to 64, and finding the collective will to get these existing tools into every single community?
That is the exact thought we want to leave you with today. The researchers and the scientists have done their job. They built the tools. The question is whether we are willing to use them to their full potential. Take charge of your health, get your routine tests, and never stop questioning the invisible realities around you. We are incredibly grateful you joined us for this deep dive into the CDC data. Keep exploring.